I'm doing what I enjoy doing. It's like other men like to play golf, so they play golf every chance they can. So you don't say to them, how come you're playing golf today? You played last week. It was the same with me. To me, it is such fun creating characters, writing stories. It's an exciting life. And when you do something that you know the fans seem to enjoy, that gives you such satisfaction, you don't want to stop.
Jake, we're here. We're here because of what we saw in the news today, and this isn't part of our regularly scheduled episode stream here. But we definitely felt like that this was one that was worth talking about and worth putting on its own episode. So here we are.
Yeah, it's kind of a bittersweet thing, more bitter than sweet right now. But it's a retrospective, and if you're listening in the future, you probably already know what we're talking about, and that is that the man himself, Stan Lieber, better known as Stan Lee, has passed away.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, and I've seen this on Twitter a little bit. People saying like, okay, like you knew cognitively that it was coming sooner rather than later. He was 95 years old. He had experienced some health issues. Like you just know that that's coming. But at the same time, you're still not completely prepared for it because, I mean, we've only known a world where his characters exist, and we've only known a world where he's been alive to advocate for them and to be an active participant in the arena of comic book and popular culture entertainment. And so just whenever you lose a giant, it is noticeable, it is felt, and emotion is had, whether the life was Herculean or not. And so it's just a really interesting thing to be like, okay, it's here. We knew it was coming, but man, it's still heavy because, I mean, who wouldn't want a world where Stan Lee lived to be forever years old,
Yeah, it's just, there's been so much that, because a few different people have texted me today, or my wife said something, and then they've said, hey, this happened. What do you think about it? And it's hard to, I mean, God forbid that I should ever try to summarize an entire human life in 5 minutes, of any person. Right. Hopefully we are all of us more complex than that. But I think that Stan Lee is such an important figure because really he's one of several people, and definitely the most visible, of a very small and elite group of people that you can look at the state of popular culture in America today, of entertainment in our country, and really beyond that in the world, and you can say that very, very few people have ever had as deep an impact and as lasting an impact as Stan Lee did. It's really difficult to overstate his contribution to culture.
And that's the thing is like, I don't want to speak too terribly cliche, and I also don't want to do a disservice, kind of like what you had touched on, but it's really common and I guess maybe part of the normal grieving process whenever an icon leaves us, whether it was due to old age or it was really, really suddenly because someone was younger. Whenever an icon or a famous person or an artist especially leaves us, the immediate thing is to go straight back to their work, their art, their livelihood, what it was that they did to contribute to us, to make us such great fans and to feel entertained, which makes sense. And we tend to hyperbolize, and we tend to try to canonize and say things like this person was such a deeply felt influence and stuff like that. And I don't want to diminish that, because that is not only a key part of the process, but it is more often than not probably true. But I'm right there with you, Jake. I don't know in this particular instance if you can overstate the massive influence that the art from the hands and the brain and the eyes of Stan Lee has really influenced the modern world around us. Like, I really don't think you can overstate that, right? Like, I don't want to try to get into a game where we go so hyperbolic that it's like, oh man, so crazy. But at the same time, it's like, dude created so many things in the comic book world and the TV world and what ended up being the movie world and everything. And it's like, can you even think of what popular culture would be like without things like Spider-Man and X-Men and everything that they have inspired and done throughout the entire existence they've had?
Well, and that's, for me, I kind of want to go so many different directions with this, but I'm going to try and rein it in. And I do want to say, I think that Stan's impact is even broader than the characters he created. And that is not at all to diminish what you just said, because what you said is insanely true. The man has created so much. But when you start looking at Stan Lee spent, he didn't spend the majority of his career creating comic books. And while it's what he's best known for, the reality is he spent the majority of his career being a guy who created comic books and creating this. He was an ambassador for the medium. And, even DC, I think, would say they owe him a debt. And that's not for any reason other than at first he begins as, the rival that drives them to be better, but eventually he becomes this force that is just a general ambassador for comic books in general. And he brings into, at a time where comic books were very much just, they had begun to wind down almost, not entirely, that's not entirely fair of me, but they'd kind of become just these perfect people doing perfect things for kids. And Stan Lee comes along and with the Fantastic Four, and then from there with Spider-Man and with the X-Men, and on and on and on and on, begins creating these characters that are human and flawed first, and then superpowered second. And it's a major, major watershed moment for the entire medium, for the whole genre. And did Stan's books get to the depth of storytelling that Alan Moore did? Did they get as dark and gritty as Frank Miller? Absolutely not. But, the man had, and this cannot be overstated, the man had Captain America punching out Hitler, a little bit before we even took a side in that war. While we were still thinking about joining up with the Axis or just staying out of it, he's going so far. And you can't overstate that. That's the then equivalent of someone trying to grow up the genre and make it more mature.
You touched on so many core principles about him. And I think if someone were to ask me, like, what's my fortune cookie summation of just who Stan Lee was, from what I could best understand, is he may be one of the most inherently good people to be easily recognizable by almost anybody in the modern Western society. Like, and I don't mean that to diminish everything. I just don't know. Do you get any more inherently good and positive than the spirit that he embodied and everything that he brought to his literary work and what he brought when he interacted with people and just his overall approach to life? Like, he just was an inherently genuine and good-hearted person. When I think about his work specifically, like you touched on, Jake, like, I think he's on the Mount Rushmore, and it's not just because he created these characters, but it's also in the way he fashioned these stories and the subversiveness that he brought to it with the positive spin. It seems like at least everything that we would consider to be some of his best works from Captain America, Fantastic Four, X-Men, Daredevil, Spider-Man, those types of folks that we all are familiar with. Those are told through the lenses of championing the underdog. They are told through the lenses of representing the everyman as best as he possibly could in this fantastical world. He's doing it in a way that Seth Rogen tweeted about, that said people that were different than others could feel normal or felt like they could find friends or felt like they could find an area to play in. Like, he found a way to still bring that classic Silver Age feel to mainstream comics, but then still had enough depth underneath that zaniness to say that there's layers here. This is him standing for the everyman. This is him saying good versus evil. This is him saying, I want my main hero to be identifiable because he's getting bullied. This is me saying, I want comic books to be subversive because when evil is present, evil is still evil. So we need to say something about that, even if it is going to be in a zany Silver Age type of comic. Like, I don't know if delicate is the right word, but that's a very delicate art form that he had perfected to be able to do that in the lens of the Silver Age genre, because Silver Age is really when he hit his peak. And as we've talked about on this pod before, Jake, the Silver Age isn't exactly known for its realism or visceral grittiness.
Yeah, he did so much, and as you're talking, I'm running through, in my hurried prep for tonight, I've run through about 1 million different points that I could hit on, and you're hitting on some of them. And it's just, the man became, and this was by design, larger than life. And he became something more than just a creator. He became the character of Stan Lee, and he embodied it. And he did write these stories, and he did create these stories about the underdog and about the everyman, and he made them. He made, you can analyze and criticize, and God knows I've done it 1 million times. Spider-Man and Captain America, all you want, and all these stories about the nerdy little dude getting his payback, and you can look at those things as for nerd rage fantasy. You can look at it as 1 million different things, but at the end of the day, the reality of it on the street level is that a lot of nerdy little dudes, myself included, took a lot of comfort in those stories. And, seeing Peter Parker grow up from being the bullied little guy to being this well-adjusted adult, among the fact that he was very funny and he could beat the crap out of bad guys. These were things that, as corny as it sounds, they resonate with those of us that were maybe not the coolest kid and just happened to have taken some bad advice on a haircut and really looked a lot more like Drew Carey than any fifth grader should, hypothetically speaking. And he created something, I don't know, the sum, Stan Lee was bigger than the sum of his parts. And I think that's how I could say he was a complex man. I'm sure were Jack Kirby with us today, he'd have some interesting retrospectives on Stan. But the reality is that Stan Lee made something bigger. And I genuinely think, to speak to your point about what a good just influence he was, I think that you can say in a way you rarely can of great figures and of people with that larger than life presence. I genuinely think that the world is better for having had him in it. And I think that his net impact on humanity was a positive one. And what more can we shoot for in life? What else could we want someone to say after 95 years?
Exactly. So it's one of those things where we're not just gutted that we've lost a giant or a superhero, as campy as it may sound. Like, he may be the closest thing to like a super type of hero that we've seen in just mainstream media, and making something out of yourself and making the world around you better, as well as more entertained. But he's got this quote that was originally published in the Washington Post in 2015, I believe, if my sort of journalistic detailed research, but not really, has proven to be fruitful. But the quote is 100% his, and it's this. And I think it speaks to an awful lot of the spirit that you were trying to capture, Jake. Being a geek has become a badge of honor. It's geeks who really make or break a TV show or a movie or a video game. They're the ones who are passionate about these things and who collect the paraphernalia and talk about them. A geek is really somebody interested in communication and entertainment and finding the best way to avail himself or herself to it. And I think that quote is not just him being a champion for the quote unquote geeks. Obviously he loves the underdog, but it's also him recognizing that the reason they are geeks is not because they are weird or they're different. It's because they value the power of narrative, and they value the immersive and emotional quality that a good narrative can bring, that a good character can bring. And as you said, so much of his career, if not actually more of his career, like as far as raw hours are concerned, he may have spent the most of his career actually just being a patron saint and an ambassador of sorts for comic book storytelling and mainstream storytelling, and trying not to overcomplicate it, but just celebrate it for what it is and its ability to reach people and the fantastical ideas that they spark. And that has given birth to not just this mainstream entertainment that we love to riff about, and why this podcast exists, and why, $1 billion goes to the Avengers every year in the box office, but it speaks about the ability to say, the people that identify with these types of characters, that identify with this kind of wonder and this kind of profundity and subversiveness and social commentary and escape and high quality entertainment and action and spandex cape laden characterization and flaws and everyman and all these things that his stories stood upon, it speaks to giving generations upon generations of people a language. It speaks to them having an identity to say, I am feeling seen now. It speaks to them to having self-discovery. It speaks to them to being self-aware and secure in themselves. And it speaks to them to know that they can enjoy something that lasts longer than just a couple of years or through a phase. And it's something that can be cross-generational and something that you pass down to your kids. It speaks to something that is unifying in a way that's not exactly hands across America. It's still a unique experience, but it's universal enough that we can speak to those ideals that they represent, but then unique enough to where we can say, this is the kind of Spider-Man I love, or this is the kind of Superman I love, and here's why. And it's all of those things. And he was the grandmaster champion of all of that. Because he didn't just craft those worlds and those characters, but he found a way to celebrate what it was, and he found a way to astutely capture what it was in words, and literally spent his entire life doing nothing but standing up for those kinds of people that resonate with that, and standing up for the artists who make it, and standing up for the art itself. And I don't know if there is much more of an inherently good or noble thing you can do when you are dedicated to a craft. And in those lights, I feel like he is a literary icon, not just a comic book icon. Does that make sense?
It does. And I would grab that and run with it to say, on the note of literary icon, I've said once or twice on here, and less than honestly I expected to when we started this show, because I've said it a lot in just daily conversation with people. Part of what I have always loved about comic books and the superhero genre is that I genuinely feel that it is, at least for the 20th, and it's looking every day more like for the 21st century, these are our mythology. This is our Hercules and our Odysseus, and this is our morality tale that we tell one another. And that's part of why it looks so different from decade to decade, but it's also part of why it's so consistent from year to year. And Stan Lee really helped, and it was that before Stan got to it, but he helped crystallize it, and he helped preserve it and make it something that could continue beyond and I do by no means want to lose in the shuffle here the important contributions of the people that have created so many other characters. But tonight is his night, and Lee had such a huge impact on, I really don't think, and I'm not going to be the only person saying this tonight, and I'm not going to be the only person saying it over the next week, but I don't think that you have comic books today, at least as they exist, without Stan Lee. I'm not sure you have. I don't know how much of how we tell stories develops. Look at how we tell one another stories, and look at how narrative works, and look at how much of that is influenced by comics, and how much of that is in turn influenced by Stan Lee and him understanding both the business and understanding how to tell a story, and understanding how a story could have an impact beyond just the story it's telling. And he's such a man. He hasn't been as active over the last few years, but it's going to be it's kind of a vacuum that I don't know will ever be filled in our culture and in our world, and that's okay. I don't think anyone should be filling it, but it's a big hole that he leaves behind tonight.
He's in the middle of that Venn diagram of one circle is insanely talented and genius, kind of like groundbreaking titan, and the other side of it is longevity, and in the middle where they intersect is the likability, and he's the one that rests in the middle. Because I mean, everyone can almost universally agree that like Alan Moore is brilliant, but I mean,
he doesn't strike me as a guy to get coffee with.
Yeah, there are probably less than 12 people on the world walking today that actually think he's a likable person, like he's a worthwhile person. You know what I mean? Like to spend significant amount of time with when you're not working on art, that sort of thing. Like, and you know, it's just really interesting to see that he was able to kind of be this character or this person that was so well beloved, but he wasn't a hack either. And it's really interesting to see that he just kind of stands alone there on that part.
Yeah, and I also want to say, you know, one thought that occurred to me. I had a couple of thoughts when I got the news that he'd passed, and one I'm just gonna own it was kind of selfish, but my thought was, oh my gosh, why don't I have that autographed picture that somebody got for me a few years ago better displayed in my home? And then my and
of
then
course.
Yeah, right. And then my well, that wasn't my first thought, but it was one of the earlier thoughts. I'm embarrassed with how early. And my other thought was, you know what? I'm really glad he lived to see the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because, you know, a lot of Stan's career he spent a lot of time and energy trying to get Marvel into the movies, and he really saw, I mean, really early, like there's depending on what you're reading and who you're talking to, there's rumblings as early as the 70s that he's like, no, we got to get into films, man. And he really saw that the way to move comic books into, and especially his universe, Marvel, into a more mainstream and especially a more long-term place in culture was to get it into film and get it up on the screen. And I mean, he's probably, that I'm aware of, the first person to really understand how these two genres could come together. And I'm going to own it and say he's the original comic watcher, because he really sees before anybody else that this could happen and that it could work. And not only that it could work, but that it would work as well as it does. And that he got to see, and he wasn't as involved in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as he had hoped to be earlier in his life, because he's getting pretty old by the time they got everything going. But that Stan got to see all of these characters come to life in such a well-realized way, and that he got to see some stories that he wrote be adapted on the screen in such an excellent way that was both faithful to the spirit of it and fresh. I'm so glad that he lived long enough to see all of that, and that he did live long enough, because I genuinely believe that grin that he's got in most of his cameos is authentic. I think he's that thrilled to be there and to see what was really his life's work realized in that form.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's a mythic level of achievement to say that he was pretty much the godfather of the Silver Age of comic books, and then he was also, you know, the huge major influencer in ushering comic books into movies as well. To be able to be that instrumental at the leading edge of two different clear iconic eras is just so unheard of. But at the same time, I don't think he would be too concerned with having that kind of iconic title. It would be more of him just being giddy with the fact that he got to birth these characters. They became popular enough to have a second life in the movies, and he just wanted to love watching them on the big screen. And it seems right that he got to truly experience that and suck the marrow out of that enough to say that he really saw it come to fruition before he left, because he deserved it. And when it's your life's work, I just think you deserve it. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just so glad he didn't have a Van Gogh thing, you know, where where it's like everything got huge after he died. Man, that would have been awful.
Exactly. So it's not a secret to repeat listeners of this podcast, Jake, that Spider-Man is your favorite hero. So do you want to take the floor for a couple of minutes and just talk about Spider-Man and Stan?
I think that, what's interesting is that, I mean, I really, man, I came ready for this, and I don't want to, let me think how to say this right. I don't want to, get real political here, because that's just not what we do. I also don't want to trash the memory of another creator, but Stan won a really important fight with Steve Ditko, who, and again, I'm not trying to trash Ditko, but Ditko had a very different vision for Spider-Man. That if you care to read about, you can on your own time. This really isn't the venue for me to be, getting into that. But Ditko had a really different vision for where that character could go and where he should go. And there was, I'm not saying that it was entirely, a fair fight all the time, but Stan really saw Spider-Man for what he should and could be, and fought for it, and to his credit, Stan is also the one that said, Jack Kirby, who is the king, was not the right guy to draw Spider-Man, that Spider-Man needed more of an everyman look. And he recognized that Ditko was the guy to bring that. But he also, when it came time to really guide the character's soul, Stan was the one that took the reins there in a way that he doesn't always, sometimes Stan's kind of hands off in creation of characters. Sometimes he's hands on, and he got pretty hands on with Spidey to say, this is an everyman, and this is an important everyman who he has to be about defending the little guy, because that's who he is at his core, is a little guy that made good. And I think then, to expand on that and wax poetic for a moment, if I can, isn't that Stan at his core, right? Because you've got this Jewish kid from New York who gets a job filling the inkwells. That was his job at Timely Comics, what would later become Marvel. He got the job totally through nepotism, through a relative, and his job was just to make sure that all the artists had ink. And he takes that to, at 19 years old, he's the editor, right? And he's running with this, and he creates these characters, and he just does this incredible stuff and has this global impact on people. And is there more? I mean, I would argue, I think Stan is Spidey in a lot of ways. And I see in that battle for Spider-Man's soul early in the character's creation and about what that character was going to represent, I see Stan in a way that he doesn't always, kind of flex his muscles to say, this is who this character is, and this is who he needs to be. So, and I say all that to say, Spidey, for me, I try not to get too corny with this, because I don't want to overstate things. I don't want to be that guy acting like Stan Lee and I had a personal relationship, and he's not a father figure to me, even though he seems like a pretty cool guy. He is just simply, however, he created this character that, as a nerdy kid with a just single parent home and a weird haircut, and I looked at Spider-Man and I was like, this is cool. Being a nerd is not the worst thing in the world. Maybe there is life beyond high school, and while it might not be super fun to be the nerd right now, maybe later in life that's worth something, and so that's a character that really did resonate with me. It really did mean something to me in my childhood, and I think Stan made that character that, even though he didn't write the stories I was reading in my childhood, he made that character what it was, and I think that, to me, that's the direct impact that the work of Stan Lee has on my life. So yeah, man, just big stuff there, the creation of Spider-Man, and really, I mean, it's the highest grossing superhero in the world. So clearly I'm not the only person that resonated with it.
And if there's something to be said about kind of the crux of your whole bit, was Stan shed a good portion of himself into Spider-Man, and I don't think that is. It can't be a coincidence then that Spider-Man is his most successful character. You know what I mean? It's not that his other ones are bad, but it's like that humanistic side of things, even as fantastical and as kind of zany as the Silver Age could get, like his ability to pour enough realistic scenario and character traits and understanding and bits of the everyman, like we've talked about it, and championing those that normally don't get championed in these types of entertainment modes, like that at the end of the day has to be a key contributing factor to why Spider-Man's legacy continues to be lasting and vastly popular, right? Yeah, sure, the entertainment's great, and his suit is legit. Like, his suit is for sure in the conversation one of the best super suits of all time. But at the same time, too, like, why has he remained more popular than Doctor Strange? You know what I mean? And obviously that's a different podcast for a different day. But easily one of the key contributing factors has to be the humanistic side of things, and that comes from the pouring of yourself into something and saying, this is a glimpse of me into the world and how I wish the world would be and what I wish more people would do. And ironically enough, people identify with that and they continue to do so. And if nothing else, man, that's enough of a salute to a legacy as anything I've ever seen from a professional artist.
Yeah, for sure, man. I don't know. I'm looking over this list while we talk of like characters created, and I'm just sitting here like my head is spinning at what the guy accomplished in just 95 years.
I know, it's unreal. I've actually got a list. I don't know if it's how current it is, but I've got a list online here on comicvine.com where it lists every single character that they believe that he contributed to creating it somewhere along the line. There's 334 listed here.
Oh my gosh, man. And it's just like, for me, I'm not Stan the man, so I can't aspire to that greatness. So I'm going to tell you, like, I'd have settled for creating one of those characters, right? Like, if I could have made Doctor Strange, I'd have called that a great achievement and said, hanging it up, guys. And that it's not, just so much. Holy cow, man. I'd have been happy to create Ant-Man, and I'm not even talking like the Ant-Man everyone loves. I'm talking Hank Pym. I'd have been perfectly happy with that.
And that's the thing, is I think if you listen to interviews that he's given too, it's like it really does come back to that happiness factor where he talks about just like, I just did this because it seemed to be where my most natural giftedness was, and I enjoyed it, and I wanted to have a life where I was doing things that I enjoyed and not instead of doing things I didn't enjoy. So that's just what I did, and that's an oversimplification, of course, and it sounds really good in a soundbite, but at the end of the day, that was his philosophy, right? So I think he would have been pleased for just creating something like Spider-Man, but he was given an arena where they said keep going, and he did, which is really great. But I mean, we've got Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, X-Men, specifically Professor X and Magneto, especially, Daredevil, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man. He came up with the term the Avengers, Black Panther. Man, there's Scarlet Witch.
Can we talk for a second about the stones? The stones on that guy to say, let's name him Black Panther. Let's make this king from Africa that roughs up white colonialists, and let's put it out there. And man, the guy he said, you know what? Here's a group of people that nobody's sticking up for. I'm gonna try and find a way to work this into fiction. Just always out there thinking, who could he represent? And it's really, in so many ways, like, he's so far ahead of his time, right? Like, we're still having some fights that I felt like Stan settled. And
100%. I feel like, especially with Black Panther, because like Black Panther is consistently labeled as the first mainstream black superhero in comics, like in like the DC Marvel like universes, those sorts of things. Like that's pretty much the first one. I have no doubt. I'm comfortable saying that he probably would have wanted to give that opportunity to an African-American artist or creator of some kind. But in that time in the 60s, that wasn't going to happen. And instead of just saying, oh man, this would be a really great idea, it's not going to happen, he at least was trying to be subversive and progressive enough to say, this needs to be out there. And if I can get this started, then maybe momentum can take it from there. And boy, howdy, did it really work.
Well, and he also had the wisdom to say, hey, maybe Cobalt Tiger wasn't the best name we came up with. You know, Jack, why don't we, I heard about these Black Panther parties going on. Why don't we slap that name on there?
Gosh, and to still do that and still be wildly beloved, it speaks to his character, and that he just really was a good person. And I always find it fascinating too when you read some of the stuff that when he gives interviews or when he would talk publicly about Dr. Doom. I think that's probably why Dr. Doom was always my favorite character that he wrote for, because he always came to it at it from this standpoint of saying that Dr. Doom was misunderstood. Like, he's not a binary villain, because he doesn't have that concept of just like, I'm doing this evil thing because this is what a villain does. It's much more gray and nuanced, surprisingly or not, because he talks about how it's this concept of like, he says everybody thinks he's a criminal because he wants to rule the world, but most regular people would just say, hey, I think it'd be cool to have that much power. I think it'd be cool to rule the world. And you can't get in trouble for that. Like, you can't be arrested for that. That doesn't make you a criminal. And him recognizing that duality and recognizing just basic human instincts and how they can morph and how they can twist and how certain opportunities and certain powers and situations can tip things one way or to the other. It makes them much more fascinating. And you and I have talked about this both behind closed doors, Jake, and also on this podcast a little bit, that Dr. Doom is like one of those characters that we're so angry that he hasn't been given the treatment that he deserves for the screen treatment, because he's arguably one of the greatest comic book villains ever penned. But the reason he's reached that level is because he's more than just a Lex Luthor, I'm a zany guy that wants to have, a lot of real estate and do bad things to people. And he's not just like a killer alien from outer space either. He's got a lot more grounding there, and Stan understood the heart of that. And I think that's another representation of what he brought to the table and what he was bringing to his characters, and why some of those characters, like you said, with Spider-Man and even with Dr. Doom, they continue to survive. Because even though Spider-Man's still super popular in the movies, of course, Dr. Doom has been butchered twice on mainstream movies, but he's got no signs of slowing down as far as the comic books are concerned.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, is like, to bring that depth to a character when he did, I mean, that's a big deal, because you've got examples of some pretty deep sci-fi at that time in the 60s. There's some, I'm not going to say every episode of the original series of Star Trek was a winner, but some of them are pretty complex. And so at that era, you've got the Twilight Zone, you've got some examples of complexity, but you're also not seeing a ton of it in comic books. Enter Stan Lee with Dr. Doom, and you've got complexity there. And it's, like I said, in so many ways, he's ahead of his time, and he has, at an age that we don't think of for having complexity and having layers and having depth. In that era, Stan Lee is able to accomplish things that we're still kind of muddling through narratively sometimes today. And he did it with such elegant simplicity, and he did it with such, it clearly brought him joy to do it. And it's so fascinating to me to see someone, and I really think sometimes that's just how I define genius, is someone who is able to do something that, 50, 60, 100 years later, we're still trying to figure out exactly how that works, and to do it so effortlessly.
I don't know if I could have captured that better. That's nail on the head. Stan was able to, I guess maybe he made everything that he touched better in a very broad sense. And that is not a small thing. he found a way to help the people around him be better. He found a way to make the characters that he was working with be better. He found a way to make the profession that he was in better and take it to new heights. He found a way to advocate for the profession in new ways as he was continuing to age. And he found a way to make movies better by saying that my characters would be great for this medium. Like he had vision, and he had a knack for casting it in front of other people and a way of sharing it that said, even if I don't necessarily understand it all the way going through, I can see that he's passionate about it. I can see that he has a destination he wants to get to, and darn it, his energy is contagious. I kind of want to follow him. Yeah,
that's well said. And I think I'm going to start running in circles, if I keep talking, because lost one of the good ones today, but to a life well lived. 95 years is a heck of a run, and he squeezed more out of those 95 than I think most of us could in a couple hundred. So Excelsior to you, Mr. Lee. Well done.
Excelsior to you, Mr. Lee. We would not be here without you. We're grateful to everything that you have done for people, society, and art and literature as a whole, because holy cow, would it be sadly and drastically different without it. So thanks to those of you listeners that wrote to us. We actually did hear from a fair amount of people that said, we'd love for you guys to do some sort of a reflection on Stan Lee. We're right there with you. We're happy to hear from you. We're glad you're listening, and we're glad that your hearts were on the same topic here, because we definitely wanted to give a shot to chat about him there, because he deserved his own episode at the very least, if that's the little bit of penance we could give him. We'll be back later in the week with your regularly scheduled Daredevil follow-up. But again, thank you so much for listening. We are the Watching Comics Podcast, and hit us up on Twitter at WatchComicsPod, or on Instagram at Watching Comics, or especially give us a rate and review on iTunes, because that will help us be found by other people like you. And we just think that's a really good idea. Thanks to the GeekDad Podcast Network for celebrating the geekhood that Stan was the patron saint of. We are happy to be a part of that network. We'll be back hitting you up later towards the end of the week.
We'll talk to you then. Thanks for joining us.
This podcast has been a production of the GeekDad Podcast Network. If you've enjoyed this content, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/geekdad.